He was pushed to the pavement so hard, his head bounced. Handcuffed in front of his own daughter. Blood on his lip. No explanation. No charges. Just two officers and a quiet street. "Daddy, what did you do?" And all he could say was, "Nothing. I just look like someone they hate." Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. Jonathan Massey parked his silver Accord in front of his own home on Sycamore Street. His daughter, Ava, sat in the back seat, still in her ballet tights, swinging her feet and humming. The sun was starting to dip behind the rows of maple trees. A calm evening, just a father and daughter coming home. He cut the engine and stepped out, reaching for her door when he saw it. A police cruiser parked across the street, idling. No lights, no movement, just parked. Jonathan hesitated. He helped Ava out of the car anyway. "Let's go inside, sweetheart," he said gently. As they reached the front steps, the cruiser's doors opened. Two officers stepped out. One tall, square-jawed, with mirrored glasses. The other younger, more tense. They didn't shout. They didn't approach quickly. But they were coming. Jonathan froze. Ava clutched his hand. "Evening, sir," the older officer said, placing a hand on his hip. "We need to ask you a few questions." Jonathan didn't answer. Not yet. He looked at their belts. One of them had already unlatched the strap on his holster. "Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. "Got a report of a break-in on this block. You match the description." Jonathan blinked. "I live here." "ID?" "In the house. That's my daughter. We just got back from ballet." The younger officer was already stepping closer. "Step away from the child." Jonathan felt Ava squeeze his fingers tighter. "I'm not going to do that, officer. She's scared. I'm just trying to take her inside." The older officer's voice sharpened. "Hands where I can see them." Jonathan raised them slowly, every muscle tense. "Sir, this is my house. Turn around. Hands on the car." Ava started to cry. Jonathan turned, placing his palms flat on the cool hood of his own vehicle. "Daddy," she cried, trying to grab his shirt. The young officer pulled her back gently, but the damage was done. Jonathan felt the first cuff tighten around his wrist. "You're under investigative detention. No sudden moves," the older one said. "This is a mistake," Jonathan said quietly. No answer, just silence, and the sound of Ava sobbing behind him. As he sat in the back of the squad car, Jonathan could still see her standing there on the sidewalk, small and alone, watching the taillights carry him away. There had been no questions, no chance to explain, just assumption, execution, and now he was gone, from his own street, from his own daughter's arms, without a single charge. And they hadn't even checked the address. The precinct smelled of old coffee and colder intentions. Jonathan sat in a plastic chair bolted to the floor, his wrists raw from the cuffs. Across the room, Officer Reynolds, the younger one, scribbled something into a notepad, deliberately slow, like a schoolboy pretending to be busy. The older cop, Sergeant Cole, stood by the door with arms crossed, watching Jonathan as if he were a loaded weapon. Jonathan tried to keep his breathing steady. His daughter's tear-streaked face haunted him. He should have been home helping her with homework, not sitting in a holding cell waiting for an explanation that hadn't come. The door creaked open. Lieutenant Simmons entered, clipboard in hand. She didn't sit, just stared down at Jonathan like he was another administrative problem. "Name," she said flatly. "Jonathan Massey. I already told the officers. I live at 215 Sycamore Street." Simmons didn't react. She glanced at the clipboard. No priors. No warrants. No outstanding tickets. Jonathan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe now they would admit the mistake. "So I can go?" Simmons didn't look up. "You fit the description. Black male. Early 30s. Blue hoodie." Jonathan stared at her. "That's it." Simmons shrugged. "We have to follow protocol. There was a break-in 2 blocks over. Witness described someone like you running from the scene." Jonathan leaned forward, the chain on his cuffs rattling. "I wasn't running. I was getting my daughter out of the car. I live on that street. Check the property records. Look at my ID. Ask my neighbors." Reynolds chuckled quietly in the corner. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Simmons closed the file. "We're waiting for the witness to come down and make an identification." Jonathan exhaled sharply. "And if they say it's not me?" "Then you're free to go," Simmons said, as if it were the most generous offer in the world. He shook his head slowly. He knew the game. He wasn't a suspect because of evidence. He was a suspect because his skin was convenient. Minutes stretched into an hour. No one spoke to him. No one offered water. No one even met his eyes. Jonathan replayed everything in his mind. Should he have argued more on the street? Should he have refused to go without a warrant? But Ava was there. He couldn't risk making a sudden move. Couldn't risk being the next headline. Finally, the door opened again. An officer he didn't recognize leaned in and whispered something to Simmons. She frowned. "Witness says it's not him," the officer said louder this time. For a second, no one moved. Then Simmons tossed the clipboard onto the table with a sigh. "Uncuff him," she ordered. Reynolds looked annoyed but obeyed. The cold metal snapped away from Jonathan's wrists, leaving angry red marks behind. Jonathan stood slowly, rubbing his wrists. "Can I see my daughter now?" he asked quietly. Simmons didn't answer. She just nodded toward the door. Jonathan walked out of the room into a hallway lined with bored-looking officers. No apologies. No acknowledgement. Just indifference. As he exited the precinct, the evening air hit him like a slap. Ava sat on a bench outside, wrapped in a police-issue blanket, her little ballet shoes dangling off the edge. Her face lit up when she saw him, but there was something broken behind her smile. Something he couldn't fix with just a hug. Jonathan picked her up, holding her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair. They had taken more than his evening. They had taken something she would never get back, the belief that her father could protect her from everything. The ride home was silent. Jonathan drove one-handed, the other resting protectively on Ava's leg. She clutched her stuffed rabbit against her chest, staring out the window. Streetlights flickered past in broken rhythm, slicing the darkness into shards. When they finally turned onto Sycamore Street, Jonathan slowed. His driveway was empty. His Accord had been left behind when the officers hauled him away. It sat there now, doors closed, headlights still faintly glowing. But something was wrong. The front door to his house was ajar. Jonathan parked across the street. His heart thudded in his chest. "Stay here," he told Ava. She shook her head, terrified. "Daddy." "No." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'll be right back. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me." Reluctantly, she slid across the seat and hit the lock button. Jonathan could see her small face pressed against the window as he crossed the street. The front lawn was trampled. Footprints. Heavy boots. He pushed the door open wider with his foot. Inside, the house had been ransacked. Drawers dumped. Cushions slashed open. His work laptop gone. The television pulled off its mount and lying cracked on the floor. Jonathan staggered back a step, breath caught in his throat. This wasn't random. This was a search. But for what? He backed out carefully, pulling out his phone. No signal. Jonathan's mind raced. He needed to call someone. Report the break-in. But who would listen? The same police who had dragged him away in front of his daughter? A car engine revved nearby. Jonathan turned to see the same cruiser from earlier roll slowly down the street. Different officers this time. But their eyes, behind the tinted glass, tracked him like prey. He quickly returned to the car, slid into the driver's seat. Ava looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Our house." "Daddy." "Why?" Jonathan didn't have an answer. He started the car and pulled away from the curb, heart hammering. He couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. He drove aimlessly at first, through neighborhoods that grew rougher the farther they got from Sycamore Street. He knew he should go to a hotel, but part of him was afraid even there they wouldn't be safe. Finally, he pulled into a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. He parked under a broken street lamp and killed the engine. Ava slept in the back seat, her rabbit still clutched tight. Jonathan leaned his forehead against the steering wheel, breathing hard. He had done everything right. Worked a steady job, paid his taxes, bought a home in a good neighborhood for his daughter. And still, it hadn't mattered. He was still the suspect. Still the threat. Still the man whose house could be torn apart without a warrant, without a second thought. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would start to fight back. Not with fists. Not with anger. But with something they didn't expect. Because they thought they had humiliated him. But Jonathan Massey wasn't just another victim. He was something else entirely. They just didn't know it yet. The diner was mostly empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A waitress wiped down a counter that didn't need cleaning, casting wary glances at Jonathan's car through the window. Jonathan stayed put, his hands resting on his knees, his mind racing. He didn't want to involve anyone else, but he had no choice now. He needed advice. He needed protection. And he knew exactly who to call. He checked his phone again. No signal. Dead zone. He cursed under his breath, remembering the emergency charger in his glove box. He plugged it in, waited, watching the signal bar. One tiny flicker of service. He dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. Massey? came a deep voice. Jonathan exhaled slowly. David, I need help. David Patel wasn't a lawyer in the traditional sense. He was an investigator for the public defender's office. Quiet, smart, dangerous to the wrong kind of people. Jonathan had helped him once, years ago, translating financial documents during a case. They'd stayed loosely in touch. Jonathan quickly explained everything. The arrest, the house, the search. David listened without interrupting. When Jonathan finished, there was a long pause. Don't go home, David said finally. I know. Don't file a complaint yet. They'll circle the wagons. They'll destroy evidence if they know you're fighting. Jonathan swallowed. What should I do? David's voice was low and serious. You need to document everything. Every scratch. Every missing item. Every time Ava cries. Every time you get followed. Photos. Videos. Dates. Times. Witnesses. Jonathan leaned back in the seat, feeling the weight of it all. I'm just one man, he said. David's voice softened. You're not just anything. You're the only thing that scares them, the one they can't break quietly. Jonathan closed his eyes. He wasn't looking for a war. He just wanted to live. But maybe surviving was the war. I'll help you, David said. But you have to be smart. They already see you as a problem. You have to be better than them at every step. Jonathan nodded slowly, even though David couldn't see him. Where are you now? David asked. Jonathan gave him the name of the diner. Stay there. I'll send someone you can trust. Don't open your mouth to anyone else. Jonathan ended the call and set the phone down on the seat beside him. Outside, the night pressed in. He watched the road carefully. Every passing car. Every set of headlights. 30 minutes passed. A battered blue sedan pulled into the lot and parked 2 spaces over. A woman stepped out, Latina, late 30s, wearing jeans and a plain jacket. She carried no purse. Her hands were empty and visible. She approached slowly, cautiously. Jonathan cracked the window. Jonathan Massey? She asked quietly. He nodded. I'm Marisol. David sent me. She handed him a business card. Private investigator, Marisol Rivas. We don't have much time, she said. They're already cleaning up. Jonathan frowned. Cleaning up what? Marisol leaned closer, her voice dropping. Internal Affairs is about to review your case, which means they'll bury it before you can file anything official. Jonathan felt the world tilt slightly. Marisol's gaze was steady. They think you'll be too scared. That you'll disappear. Move away. Stay quiet. Jonathan looked at his daughter sleeping in the back seat. Fear twisted in his chest. But under it, something else. Something stronger. Resolve. He turned back to Marisol. What do I have to do? She smiled slightly, a grim, knowing smile. You fight smart. You hit where they don't expect. Jonathan nodded. He wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Morning came cold and sharp. Jonathan hadn't slept. He spent the night curled in the front seat, one eye always half open, his hand resting lightly on the door handle. Every sound, every revving engine, every squeal of tires, made his body tense like a spring. At sunrise, Ava stirred in the back seat. Her voice was small. Are we going home, Daddy? Jonathan turned, forcing a smile. Not yet, baby. We're going somewhere safe first. He drove toward the east side of town, keeping to side streets, avoiding main roads. Marisol had given him an address, a tiny legal aid office squeezed between a pawn shop and an abandoned laundromat. Jonathan parked 2 blocks away, walking the last stretch with Ava bundled in his arms, her face buried against his chest. Inside, the building smelled of dust and old coffee. A woman at the front desk looked up, startled, but relaxed when she saw Marisol waving from a corner. Marisol led him through a back hallway, into a windowless room lined with file cabinets and mismatched chairs. A man sat at the table, wearing a threadbare suit and tired eyes. He rose when they entered. Marcus Chun. He introduced himself, offering a firm handshake. Civil rights attorney. Very off the books. Jonathan sat down heavily, pulling Ava onto his lap. Marcus pulled out a legal pad. Tell me everything. Start from the first second they saw you. Jonathan did. The wrongful detention. The unnecessary force. The illegal search. The intimidation. The missing belongings. Every detail he could remember, he spilled out while Marcus scribbled notes at lightning speed. When he finished, Marcus leaned back. You're sitting on a mountain of violations, he said. But we have to be careful. Jonathan's face hardened. Careful? They think they can destroy my life and walk away. They usually do, Marcus said calmly. That's why we don't let them know what we're building. He pushed a form across the table. First, a formal complaint. But not to internal affairs, we bypass them. Straight to the city's Office of Public Accountability. Simultaneously, we file a civil notice of claim that locks the city legally. No quiet settlements. No secret apologies. Jonathan took the pen. His hand hesitated. He thought about Ava, about the future he wanted for her, about the risk. But then he thought about the broken door, the empty house, the fear. He signed. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good. Step 2. Media. But not the big guys. They'll twist your story. We go small. Independent reporters. Hyperlocal coverage. Keep it factual. Keep it cold. Jonathan felt a chill at the ruthlessness of it. It wasn't the kind of fight he had ever imagined. But maybe it was the only kind that mattered. Marcus leaned forward. Last thing. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. Once your name gets out, others will find you. People who've been hurt the same way. You'll be their proof it can be fought. Jonathan swallowed hard. He hadn't asked for that. But maybe he couldn't refuse it anymore. He rose from the chair, lifting Ava into his arms again. What's next? He asked. Marcus smiled grimly. Now? You go dark. Stay invisible. Let them wonder what you're planning. Fear is a beautiful thing when it's on the right side. Jonathan nodded once. He understood now. This wasn't survival. It was war. And he was ready. Jonathan disappeared. He stopped using his credit cards. He didn't go back to his house. He kept Ava close, moving between cheap motels and Marisol's trusted safe houses. No patterns. No routines. By the third day, the calls started. First, a courtesy call from the police precinct. A cheery voice inviting him to come in and clear up any misunderstandings. Jonathan didn't answer. Then, a letter slid under the door of a motel room. No return address. Just 2 words scrawled across the page. Talk soon. Jonathan stared at it without blinking, then tore it into pieces and flushed it down the toilet. They were nervous. And that gave him leverage. Marisol moved fast. With her connections, they found a sympathetic freelance journalist, Dana Torres, a local reporter known for digging into city corruption. Jonathan met her in a shadowed corner of a public library. Ava perched quietly beside him, drawing shapes on a scrap of paper. Dana was small, intense, all sharp angles and sharper questions. I need verifiable details, she said, clicking her pen. I'm risking my press credentials on this. Jonathan handed her a thick folder. Marcus had helped organize it. Photos of the bruises. A copy of the property deed for his house. A list of missing items. Witness statements from neighbors who had seen the arrest. Everything clean. Everything airtight. Dana's eyebrows lifted as she flipped through the evidence. This isn't just about you, she murmured. If this gets out, a lot of people are going to start asking hard questions. Jonathan's voice was steady. Good. They agreed. No interviews. No dramatic headlines. Just a quiet article, buried deep on a local news site, where only the right people would see it. A surgical strike. The article dropped 3 days later. Unlawful detainment and alleged home search raised concerns at Sycamore Precinct. No names. No accusations. Just facts. But it hit like a grenade. By noon, Marisol's burner phone was blowing up. They're panicking, she said, grinning. Internal Affairs just requested all body cam footage from the arrest. Guess what? The cameras were mysteriously malfunctioning that day. Jonathan said nothing. He expected it. By evening, a city councilman had tweeted a vague promise of increased accountability measures for the precinct. Small cracks. Barely visible, but real. Jonathan knew better than to celebrate. The pressure needed to stay quiet. Steady. Invisible. He kept moving. Another motel. Another burner phone. Everywhere they went, Ava stayed glued to his side. She never asked about home anymore. She just held his hand tightly whenever they crossed parking lots or walked into buildings. Late one night, as Jonathan sat awake, he watched her sleeping. She deserved better than a life lived in fear, and he was going to give it to her. But first, he had to finish what he started. He picked up the burner phone and dialed Marcus. It's time for phase 2, Jonathan said quietly. Marcus didn't ask questions. I'll be ready. Jonathan hung up. He leaned back against the wall, staring at the cracked ceiling, his heart hammering in his chest. He had survived the arrest. He had survived the first blows. Now, he was done surviving. Now, he was about to strike. The retaliation came fast. Jonathan felt it before he saw it, like a shift in the air, a tightening of invisible threads around him. First, it was the motel manager. A knock on the door at 6 a.m., a thin man in a wrinkled shirt shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Sorry, sir, but, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. New policy. No long stays without a credit check." Jonathan didn't argue. He gathered their few belongings, scooped Ava into his arms, and walked out. The next place was worse. 2 nights in, a patrol car idled across the street for hours. No officers approached. They just sat there, lights off, windows up, watching. The message was clear: "We know where you are." Jonathan moved again. He started noticing strange things. Phone calls that rang once and hung up. Shadowed figures standing just a little too long near playgrounds where he took Ava for fresh air. A black SUV that showed up in every parking lot he stopped in, no matter how far across town he traveled. At first, Ava didn't notice. But kids are sharper than adults want to believe. One afternoon, she tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Daddy, that car was at the library too." Jonathan crouched to her level, brushing hair from her face. "I see it, baby. Stay close to me, okay?" She nodded solemnly, her small fingers threading through his. That night, he called Marcus. "They're escalating," Jonathan said. Marcus's voice was steady. "Expected. They're trying to break your focus. Make you slip. Make you run." Jonathan looked out the grimy motel window, watching headlights drift by like sharks under the surface. "What do I do?" Marcus's answer was simple. "You stay visible to the right people. Not loud. Just documented." Jonathan exhaled. He understood. Visibility was protection. He bought a cheap dashboard camera and mounted it facing outward. He paid cash for a GoPro and clipped it to the inside of his jacket whenever they left a building. He filmed everything. Every time an officer's car followed too close. Every time a motel clerk gave him a suspicious look. Every time a stranger lingered too long. He uploaded the footage nightly, encrypted, onto a private drive Marisol had set up. 2 days later, Dana published a second quiet article. Pattern of surveillance emerges in wake of Sycamore incident. Again, no accusations. No names. Just facts. But this time, the tension rippled wider. A sympathetic city council aide reached out, offering to look into the matter. Jonathan declined politely. He trusted no one. Every move forward was a risk, but standing still was worse. He knew what they wanted. They wanted him afraid. They wanted him isolated. They wanted him to snap, to give them an excuse to paint him as unstable, dangerous. But Jonathan Massey wasn't breaking. He was sharpening, waiting, watching. Every hour that passed, the balance shifted, a fraction of a degree, invisible to them, but clear to him. They thought they had cornered him. But Jonathan wasn't cornered. He was baiting the trap. And soon, he was going to spring it. The break came on a cold Thursday morning. Jonathan was sitting in the back booth of a rundown diner, the kind where the coffee tasted like burnt rubber and the linoleum floor stuck to your shoes. Ava colored quietly beside him, her crayon spread out like a small, innocent battlefield. The bell above the door jingled. Jonathan didn't turn his head, but he caught the reflection in the window. 2 men. Suits too sharp, movements too casual. Not cops. Something worse. Internal affairs. He kept his breathing even as they approached. The taller one, gray hair slicked back, slid into the booth across from him without invitation. His partner stood near the door, watching the room. "Mr. Massey," the tall one said, flashing a badge. "Special Investigator Cross." "This is Investigator Holloway." Jonathan said nothing. Cross leaned in, his voice low. "We're looking into the incident on Sycamore Street. Thought you might want to share your side. You know, off the record." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Thought you were supposed to be neutral." Cross smiled thinly. "We are. We just like to get the full picture. Man to man." Jonathan watched him for a long moment. This wasn't a request. This was an ambush. Ava tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, can we go?" Jonathan smiled at her gently. "In a minute, baby girl." He turned back to Cross. "I'll make it simple," Jonathan said, voice calm. "Any questions you have, send them through my attorney." Cross's smile vanished. For a second, his mask slipped, and Jonathan saw it, the frustration, the disdain. "Good. No need to get adversarial," Cross said smoothly. "We're just trying to help you." Jonathan stood up, lifting Ava into his arms. "Funny. That's exactly what the officers said before they slammed me into a car and tore apart my home." He turned and walked out without another word. Outside, the cold air stung his face. He strapped Ava into the car seat quickly, heart pounding. He knew what would happen next. They would paint him as uncooperative, difficult, hostile, and it would all be used to justify what they had already done. He drove straight to Marcus's temporary office. Marcus listened silently as Jonathan recounted the encounter. When Jonathan finished, Marcus leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Perfect," he said. Jonathan frowned. "Perfect?" Marcus tapped a folder on the table. "They just made a critical mistake. Contact outside formal procedures? Attempting to intimidate without counsel present? That's a violation." He slid a document across the table. "We file this tomorrow. It forces them into public deposition. Under oath." Jonathan stared at the paper. It wasn't just a complaint anymore. It was a legal hammer, and he was about to swing it. For the first time since this nightmare began, Jonathan felt the balance truly shift. Not hope, not yet, but momentum. He looked up at Marcus, his voice low and certain. "Let's finish this." Marcus nodded once. "Now they bleed." The backlash came fast and ugly. The day after Marcus filed the formal deposition request, the whispers started. Jonathan heard them even in places he never set foot. Online forums, neighborhood apps, anonymous posts under local news stories. Unstable father with a history of anger issues. Possible drug connections. Not telling the full story. None of it was true. But truth wasn't their weapon. Smear was. Dana Torres called him late that night, her voice tight with anger. "They're trying to bury you, Jonathan. They're feeding background noise to friendly outlets. No official statements, just leaks." Jonathan leaned against the motel wall, staring at the cracked ceiling. "Can you stop it?" "Not completely, but I can counter it." She promised a series of follow-up articles, clean, fact-based, undeniable. But it would take time. Time Jonathan might not have. The next morning, the SUV returned. Not discreetly this time. It idled outside the motel, windows blacked out. No movement. No lights. A presence. A threat. Jonathan packed their few things in minutes, waking Ava gently. "Another trip. Baby," he whispered. She didn't even ask where they were going. She just grabbed her rabbit and slipped her tiny hand into his. They drove without a destination, moving through neighborhoods like ghosts. At a red light, Jonathan caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes. Tighter jaw. Not beaten, but changed. His phone buzzed. "Marisol. You need to hear this," she said without greeting. She patched him into a call. Marcus's voice came through, grim and urgent. "The precinct filed a counterclaim. They're accusing you of resisting arrest and endangering a minor." Jonathan's stomach twisted. "Ava." They were using her now. He pulled over, parking in a deserted strip mall. "What does it mean?" he asked tightly. Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. "It's a scare tactic. But if they push it, it could trigger Child Protective Services." Jonathan closed his eyes, felt the ground shift under his feet. Ava stirred in the back seat, murmuring in her sleep. Marcus continued. "Listen to me. They are desperate. This is their last play. If they really had anything, they would have charged you already. They're bluffing. But you need to be ready." Jonathan opened his eyes, staring into the night. "I'm ready," he said quietly. Marisol cut in. "We anticipated this. Documents are ready. Witness statements. Body cam absence reports. Character affidavits. We flood the system before they can move." Jonathan nodded to himself. For every lie they tried to plant, he would answer with cold, irrefutable fact. He wasn't going to lose his daughter. He wasn't going to lose his dignity. They had underestimated him at every turn. Thought he was just another name they could erase. But Jonathan Massey was still standing, and he was done playing defense. He started the car. Tomorrow, they would learn what real fear looked like. The fear of facing a man they couldn't silence. Jonathan walked into the courthouse with his head high. No camera crews. No reporters. Just heavy air and the low murmur of official voices. Marcus walked beside him, a thick file clutched under one arm. Marisol trailed behind, keeping a watchful eye on every corridor, every security checkpoint. Today wasn't about noise. It was about the truth. They entered hearing room 4B, a small space with faded wood paneling and a cracked seal of the city on the back wall. At the table opposite sat 3 representatives from the precinct's legal office, stiff, pale, uncomfortable. Behind them, no officers, no backup, no proud defense. Jonathan took his seat without a word. The presiding judge, a woman with a stern face and quick eyes, entered and settled behind the bench. "This is a preliminary motion hearing regarding allegations of unlawful arrest, illegal search and seizure, and retaliatory harassment, she said crisply. Mr. Massey, you may proceed. Marcus rose calmly. No theatrics. No outrage. Just facts. He outlined the wrongful detention, presented the property records proving Jonathan lived where he was arrested, showed time-stamped security footage from nearby stores proving Jonathan wasn't fleeing any scene, submitted medical reports documenting bruises from the arrest. Then came the kicker. Marcus laid out the complete disappearance of body cam footage, violating departmental policy. He entered the officer contact logs, proving multiple attempts to intimidate Jonathan after his release. He entered Marisol's investigation logs, evidence of coordinated vehicle surveillance without a warrant. He entered public record screenshots, time-stamped leaks smearing Jonathan's reputation. Each piece of evidence clicked into place like a blade locking into a guillotine. Across the room, the precinct lawyers shifted uncomfortably. They knew. They had already lost. The judge asked minimal questions. She simply flipped through the evidence, her face unreadable. When Marcus finished, he returned to his seat. Silence hung heavy. Finally, the lead precinct attorney stood. She didn't argue. She didn't even look at Jonathan. Instead, she spoke quietly. Your Honor, the city is prepared to enter into immediate settlement discussions. The judge arched an eyebrow. A settlement? Before testimony? Yes, Your Honor. Full damages. Immediate expungement of all false claims. And formal review of departmental conduct. Jonathan sat still. Marcus turned slightly toward him, whispering, It's a win. A full win. Jonathan said nothing. His eyes met the judge's for a long moment. He saw something there. Something small but real. Respect. The judge cleared her throat. Mr. Massey, do you accept the terms proposed? Jonathan rose slowly to his feet. The room felt very quiet. I do, Your Honor, he said steadily. On one condition. The judge gestured for him to continue. Jonathan's voice didn't waver. There's no confidentiality clause. No non-disparagement agreement. No gag order. I tell my story however I want. Whenever I want. A small murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lead city attorney paled, whispering hurriedly with her colleagues. Finally, she looked up, defeated. Agreed. The judge made a final note. Settlement accepted with conditions. Mr. Massey, congratulations. Jonathan nodded once. Not smiling. Not celebrating. Just reclaiming what had always been his. He gathered Ava into his arms as they walked out into the sunlight. There were no cheering crowds. No headlines. No parades. Just a man, his daughter, and the quiet knowledge that he had stood alone and prevailed. That night, as he tucked Ava into bed in a real home, under clean sheets, he kissed her forehead gently. You're safe, he whispered. I promised. And I kept it. Ava smiled in her sleep. Jonathan stood by the window for a long time, watching the stars. He knew the system was still broken. Knew others would still fall. But tonight, he had won. Not by pleading. Not by rage. But by standing. By refusing to break. By demanding and taking his place. And no one could take that from him again. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.